Welcome to Old State Valuable Coins. Today, we're exploring the top 4 most valuable and expensive United States Washington quarter dollars. Coins that may look ordinary at first glance, but can become remarkably desirable because of rarity, condition, varieties, and extraordinary minting errors. We'll uncover the history behind these fascinating quarters, examine what makes certain examples so valuable, and reveal the realistic prices that exceptional specimens have reached. So stay with us until the end. You might never look at an old Washington quarter the same way again. Let's get started. First up to imagine finding an ordinary-looking 1967 Washington quarter in an old box, a drawer, or a forgotten collection, turning it over in your hand, and wondering whether those scratches, that strange toning, or the absence of a mint mark could somehow make it worth far more than 25 cents. The truth is both more fascinating and more complicated. A normal circulated 1967 Washington quarter is not automatically a rare treasure, and the missing mint mark is not itself an error. But this date comes from one of the most unusual periods in modern United States coinage, and under extraordinary circumstances, a 1967 quarter can become a serious numismatic collectible. The key is not simply the date. It is the combination of condition, strike quality, surface preservation, minting characteristics, recognized varieties, and genuine mint errors. The Philadelphia Mint alone produced 873,524,000 1967 quarters, while Denver produced 632,767,848 and San Francisco produced 17,740,000, creating a combined production of more than 1.5 billion pieces. Yet despite that enormous output, the finest surviving examples can bring surprisingly strong prices. PCGS records an auction result of $8,813 for a regular strike 1967 quarter graded MS68, demonstrating the enormous difference between an ordinary example and an elite condition survivor. To understand why this quarter matters, we have to travel back to 1967, a year when the United States was experiencing extraordinary social, political, and technological change. America was deeply involved in the Vietnam War. The civil rights movement was still reshaping national conversation, and the country was experiencing intense debate over poverty, race, military policy, and the direction of American society. On April 4, 1967, Martin Luther King Jr. delivered his major anti-war speech, Beyond Vietnam, reflecting the growing connection between civil rights, poverty, and the war overseas. At the same time, America was racing toward the moon, with the Apollo program pushing the nation into a new technological age. And in the middle of all this turmoil, Americans continued using small metal coins every day for gasoline, groceries, newspapers, parking, vending machines, and countless ordinary transactions. The quarter in your hand was therefore not created as a collector's trophy. It was working money. It was designed to circulate. It was expected to be handled, dropped, scratched, stacked, counted, and spent. That historical reality is part of what makes surviving high-grade pieces so interesting today. The coins that escape decades of everyday abuse can become dramatically more desirable than the millions that performed exactly the job they were made to perform. The Washington quarter itself was already a famous American design by 1967. John Flanagan's portrait of George Washington had appeared on the quarter since 1932, when the design was introduced to commemorate the bicentennial of Washington's birth. The obverse shows Washington facing left, surrounded by Liberty, Indiana God We Trust, and the date. The reverse presents the American eagle standing on a bundle of arrows, with olive branches beneath, United States of America above, e pluribus unum between the eagle and the denomination, and quarter dollar below. The design was intended to combine national symbolism with a dignified portrait of America's first president. By 1967, however, the quarter had undergone one of the most important changes in its history. Beginning in 1965, the traditional silver composition was removed from circulating quarters and replaced with copper-nickel-clad construction. That means a normal 1967 quarter is not a 90% silver Washington quarter like the classic 1932 through 1964 issues. Instead, it has a copper-nickel outer layer surrounding a copper core. This distinction is crucial because one of the biggest mistakes made by inexperienced collectors is assuming that every 1960s Washington quarter contains silver simply because of its age. Now comes one of the most important mysteries surrounding the 1967 issue, the missing mint mark. If you have a 1967 quarter with no D or S, that does not prove it was struck in Philadelphia, and it certainly does not automatically make the coin rare. During the coin shortage and period of intense collector hoarding in the mid-1960s, the mint deliberately removed mint marks from circulating coins dated 1965 through 1967. That policy means the traditional rule of no mint mark equals Philadelphia does not work normally for this date. Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco all participated in 1967 production, yet circulating coins carried no mint marks. So if your coin is scratched and toned, its blank mint mark area is not an error. There was no missing D that should have been punched there. This is especially important for a documentary about valuable coins because genuine numismatics depends on separating a fascinating historical characteristic from a manufactured rarity claim. A 1967 quarter can certainly be valuable under the right circumstances, but the absence of a mint mark by itself is simply normal for the period. The enormous production numbers also teach us an important lesson about rarity. More than 1.5 billion 1967 Washington quarters were produced across the three facilities, so this is not a classic low mintage key date. Yet mintage and rarity are not the same thing. Think about what happened to those coins after they left the mint. Billions of transactions occurred. Quarters were carried in pockets, thrown into machines, dropped on pavement, stored in jars, exposed to moisture, cleaned with chemicals, rubbed against other coins, and spent repeatedly. The majority were never preserved for collectors. PCGS notes that circulated 1967 quarters were common for decades, and that the collector focus today is primarily on mint state examples, especially the difficult-to-find gem and superb gem pieces. The absence of official uncirculated mint sets in 1967 also matters because collectors did not receive the same standardized source of pristine examples that existed in other years. This creates a fascinating paradox. More than a billion coins can exist, while truly exceptional examples remain difficult to locate. A worn quarter with scratches is therefore usually common, but a spectacularly preserved piece with blazing original surfaces, strong strike quality, and an elite certified grade can belong to an entirely different market. That brings us back to the coin sitting on the table. A scratched, toned 1967 Washington quarter is not automatically a hidden fortune, and the missing mint mark is not an error. But that does not make it uninteresting. It is a survivor from a remarkable chapter in American coinage, produced during the great mid-1960s coin shortage, when the mint temporarily removed mint marks from circulating coins and transitioned the quarter from traditional silver to copper-nickel-clad construction. It carries John Flanagan's enduring portrait of Washington, a design that has remained one of the most recognizable images in American money. And somewhere within the enormous population of 1,967 quarters, there are exceptional survivors. Coins with extraordinary preservation, spectacular strikes, documented varieties, dramatic mint errors, unusual planchets, or elite certified grades. That is the real lesson of the 1967 quarter. A coin does not become valuable simply because someone says it is rare. It becomes valuable when the evidence proves that it is different. So if you discover one, look beyond the date and the missing mint mark. Study the surfaces, examine the strike, inspect the lettering and date under magnification, check the edge and weight, compare unusual features with documented varieties, and never clean the coin in an attempt to make it look newer. The ordinary 1967 quarter may be worth little more than its face value, but an authenticated exceptional example can enter a completely different world. And that is what makes this small 25-cent piece so compelling. After more than half a century, the difference between an everyday coin and a valuable numismatic prize can sometimes be hidden in details no larger than a few letters, a tiny shift in metal, or a nearly perfect surviving surface. Next up to in the imagine finding a 1984 Washington quarter in an old box of coins, its surface showing scratches from years of handling and its color softened by natural toning. At first glance, there seems to be nothing extraordinary about it. After all, Philadelphia struck an astonishing 676,545,000 Washington quarters in 1984, and millions of these coins survived. But this is where the story becomes much more interesting, because coin collecting is rarely about the date alone. It is about survival, condition, strike quality, originality, varieties, errors, and the competition that develops when collectors want an exceptional example. The first thing we need to establish is the mint mark. In 1984, P was struck at the Philadelphia Mint, while in 1984, D was struck in Denver. The 1984 P is a copper-nickel-clad 25-cent coin, not a silver dime, and its ordinary circulated value is generally modest. Yet PCGS records a remarkable $1,292.50 auction result for a 1984 P-graded MS-67, sold by Heritage Auctions on February 4, 2016. That dramatic difference between an ordinary quarter and a certified top-grade example is what makes this coin worth investigating. The question is not whether every 1984 P is rare, because it clearly is not. The real question is why a coin produced in quantities approaching 700 million can still become a four-figure collectible under extraordinary circumstances. To understand the coin, we have to travel back to 1984, a fascinating year in American history. The United States was emerging from the severe recession of the early 1980s. Economic conditions were improving, and the country was experiencing a renewed sense of optimism. The year was also dominated by the Los Angeles Summer Olympics, which brought worldwide attention to the United States, while American technology and popular culture were changing rapidly. Personal computers were becoming increasingly important, the consumer electronics industry was expanding, and the country was entering an increasingly modern technological era. Meanwhile, ordinary Americans still relied heavily on physical cash for daily transactions, and quarters moved constantly through stores, vending machines, banks, parking meters, and countless pockets. The Washington quarter had already been a familiar part of American life for more than 5 decades. John Flanagan designed the original Washington quarter portrait, introduced in 1932 to commemorate the bicentennial of George Washington's birth. The obverse presents Washington facing left, with liberty above his portrait, in God we trust on either side, and the date below. The reverse features an eagle with outstretched wings surrounded by United States of America, e pluribus unum, and quarter dollar. By 1984, the coin was being produced in the modern clad composition introduced for circulating quarters in 1965, consisting of copper-nickel outer layers bonded to a copper center. The enormous mintage of 676,545,000 immediately tells us that the ordinary 1984 P cannot honestly be described as an ultra-rare coin simply because of its date. PCGS estimates that roughly 236.8 million examples survive in all grades, with approximately 71 million surviving at MS-60 or better and more than 14 million at MS-65 or better. Those numbers are enormous by the standards of classic American rarities. Yet PCGS specifically notes that the 1984 P becomes scarce at MS-67 and higher. This is the concept of condition rarity, and it is one of the most important ideas in modern coin collecting. A coin can be common in worn condition, but difficult to find in superb condition. Imagine hundreds of millions of identical coins leaving the mint, then consider what happens over the next 40 years. Most enter circulation, where they are repeatedly dropped, rubbed, scratched, stacked, transported, and handled. Even coins that never circulate can receive contact marks from other coins during transportation. As a result, the number of coins surviving with truly exceptional surfaces becomes much smaller than the original mintage suggests. The 1984 P therefore demonstrates why collectors never judge rarity from mintage alone. Strike quality is another major part of the mystery. A quarter can be technically uncirculated and still fail to impress advanced collectors because of weak detail, distracting contact marks, dull luster, or unattractive surfaces. On a Washington quarter, the portrait and surrounding fields can reveal countless tiny imperfections under magnification. Washington's cheek, jaw, hair, and the open areas surrounding the portrait are particularly important when judging the visual quality of a high-grade coin. The reverse must also be examined carefully for marks, abrasions, and weakness. This is why the difference between MS-65, MS-66, and MS-67 can be far more important financially than a casual observer might expect. PCGS describes the 1984 P as readily available in gem condition, but specifically identifies MS-67 and higher as the point where scarcity becomes significant. The condition census information is especially revealing because multiple MS-67 examples are listed among the finest certified coins, including examples associated with the D.L. Hansen collection. In other words, the competition is not for simply owning a 1984 P. It is for owning one of the best 1984 P quarters known at a particular grading level. Now we enter the complicated world of varieties and mint errors. Collectors examining a 1984 P may notice apparent doubling around the lettering, an unusual date, a strange-looking P mint mark, die cracks, raised lines, missing details, or an irregular edge. But every unusual appearance must be investigated carefully. True doubled dies originate from a characteristic created during the die-making process and can show distinctive separation or secondary images. Machine doubling is different and often does not carry the same collector premium. Die cracks can form when a working die develops a fracture after repeated stress, and these cracks can appear as raised lines on struck coins. A cud can occur when a portion of a die breaks away. Off-center strikes happen when a planchet is improperly positioned between the dies, potentially leaving part of the design outside the normal coin boundary. Clipped planchets result from abnormalities in the blanking process. There can also be die chips, strike-throughs, and other recognized mint-made abnormalities. However, claims involving large dates, small dates, overdates, or repunched mint marks require particular caution. These terms are sometimes applied loosely online, even when the feature is merely damage or die deterioration. A collector should never assign a major value to an unusual-looking 1984 P until the characteristic has been properly identified and, when appropriate, professionally attributed. The final lesson of the 1984 P. Washington quarter is perhaps the most important one of all. Philadelphia struck 676,545,000 examples, and PCGS estimates hundreds of millions survived, so the ordinary coin is clearly common. Yet at MS-67 and higher, the population becomes far more selective, and the documented $1,292.50 auction record proves that exceptional preservation can create serious collector value. The coin is not valuable because it contains silver. It does not. It is not a 10-cent coin. It is a 25-cent clad quarter. And it is not automatically rare because it carries the date 1984 and the P mint mark. Its potential significance comes from what happened to that individual coin after it was struck. Did it survive without damage? Did it receive an exceptional strike? Does it possess an authentic variety or error? And can its condition and identity be independently verified? A scratched and toned example will normally remain far below the elite auction category unless a genuine rare feature changes the equation. But that is exactly what makes coin collecting so fascinating. Among hundreds of millions of ordinary coins, a tiny number can emerge as exceptional survivors. And sometimes the difference between 25 cents and a four-figure collectible is not something you can see from across the room. It is hidden in the smallest details of the coin, and that is why the next 1984 P. Washington quarter you encounter may deserve a much closer look. Next up to in the imagine pulling a 1982 Washington quarter from an old collection and noticing immediately that it looks tired from decades of use. The surfaces are scratched, the color has changed with age, and the coin seems like nothing more than another piece of ordinary American pocket change. But now imagine placing that same quarter beneath magnification and discovering an unusual feature that was created at the United States Mint rather than after the coin entered circulation. Suddenly, the story changes. The 1982 P. Washington quarter is especially interesting because Philadelphia produced an enormous number of them. Yet exceptional examples can bring surprisingly strong prices when preservation reaches the highest levels or when a legitimate mint error makes an individual coin genuinely scarce. One crucial detail must be corrected at the beginning. The P mint mark identifies Philadelphia, while Denver quarters from 1982 carry AD. Philadelphia struck 500,930,000 Washington quarters in 1982, so an ordinary circulated example is absolutely not a guaranteed rarity. But the finest survivors tell another story. PCGS records a remarkable $10,200 auction result for an MS-68 1982 P, demonstrating how far the value can separate when an ordinary 25-cent coin survives in extraordinary condition. PCGS.com. The year 1982 provides an important historical backdrop for understanding this quarter. The United States was experiencing a serious recession, unemployment was high, interest rates were extraordinarily elevated, and American households were feeling the effects of economic uncertainty. At the same time, technology was beginning to transform everyday American life, with personal computers becoming increasingly visible and the country moving toward a more digital future. Yet ordinary commerce still depended heavily on physical cash, and millions of Washington quarters were moving through stores, banks, vending machines, telephones, parking meters, and countless transactions. The Washington quarter had already been part of American life for 50 years. John Flanagan Washington portrait had first appeared on the quarter in 1932, created for the bicentennial of George Washington's birth. The obverse displays Washington facing left, with liberty above, in God we trust on either side, and the date below. The reverse features a powerful eagle with outstretched wings, surrounded by United States of America, e pluribus unum, and $quarter. By 1982, however, the traditional silver composition had long disappeared from circulating quarters. The 1982 P was a clad quarter made with copper-nickel outer layers bonded to a copper core, meaning that its historical importance comes from its place in the transition of modern American coinage rather than from silver content. PCGS.com. The first question any collector should ask is simple. If more than 500 million were made, how can this quarter possibly be rare? The answer is that mintage and rarity are not the same thing. Philadelphia produced exactly 500,931,000 examples, a figure large enough to guarantee that ordinary 1982 P quarters would remain abundant for decades. But coins do not all survive in the same condition. A quarter intended for everyday commerce can be dropped, scratched, rubbed against other coins, placed in bags, fed through machines, or stored carelessly. Over time, millions of once brilliant coins become circulated examples with dull surfaces and contact marks. The population becomes dramatically smaller when collectors demand coins at the highest certified grades. PCGS identifies the issue as increasingly difficult in the upper mint state grades, and its auction records show the enormous financial difference between an ordinary survivor and an elite one. The 1982 PMS 68 that sold for $10,200 was not valuable because Philadelphia produced only a few quarters. It was valuable because a coin from an enormous production run survived at an exceptional level, and collectors were willing to compete for one of the finest known representatives. PCGS.com. That journey through circulation is exactly why strike quality and surface preservation matter so much. When a quarter leaves a minting press, its surfaces can display fresh luster and sharp design detail. But that condition can disappear quickly. Contact with other coins can create small abrasions, while machines and hard surfaces can produce more serious marks. On Washington's portrait, the cheek and jaw are especially important areas because prominent marks can immediately affect the visual quality of the coin. The open fields surrounding the portrait and the reverse can also reveal scratches that become obvious under magnification. A coin may technically have never circulated, but still suffer damage from being transported in large quantities. This is why collectors searching for top-grade 1982 P quarters examine the entire surface rather than simply asking whether the coin looks shiny. Luster, strike strength, contact marks, coloration, eye appeal, and originality all contribute to the final assessment. An MS65, MS66, MS67, and MS68 are not merely different numbers. They represent increasingly difficult levels of survival. At the highest level, a single distracting mark can separate an ordinary mint state coin from a piece that attracts serious registry set competition. The world of varieties makes the 1982 quarter even more complicated. Collectors may encounter claims involving large dates, small dates, doubled dies, repunched mint marks, overdates, die cracks, cuds, off-center strikes, clipped planchets, and other unusual features. But the presence of a strange-looking detail does not automatically make a coin rare. A genuine doubled die results from a characteristic in the die-making process and can create distinctive doubling that differs from ordinary machine doubling. A die crack develops as a working die experiences stress and begins to fracture, leaving a raised line or other characteristic on coins struck afterward. An off-center strike occurs when the planchet is not properly centered between the dies, potentially leaving part of the design missing and producing a dramatic appearance. A clipped planchet can occur when the blanking process improperly cuts the planchet from the metal strip. These errors can be valuable when they are genuine, dramatic, and scarce. But collectors must be especially careful with 1982 claims involving repunched mint marks because mint mark production methods changed over time. A supposed doubled P, strange date, or unusual mint mark should be authenticated before anyone describes it as an ultra-rare variety. Understanding how these errors happen makes the coin's story even more fascinating. Coin production involves carefully prepared dies and planchets brought together in a high-pressure striking operation. If a problem occurs during die creation, a characteristic can potentially be transferred to every coin struck from that die. If something goes wrong during the actual strike, the result can be limited to a smaller number of coins. A planchet that shifts position can create an off-center strike. A damaged die can create a cud or die crack. Foreign material between the die and planchet can create an unusual impression. A deteriorating die can soften or distort portions of the design. What collectors sometimes call doubling can also have different causes, which is why specialists distinguish true hub-related doubled dies from mechanical or strike-related doubling. The same caution applies to supposed transitional errors. A legitimate transitional error would involve a coin struck with an incorrect composition during a changeover between compositions, but a claim requires strong physical evidence and expert authentication. The key point is that genuine errors are created by the manufacturing process, while scratches, gouges, polishing marks, and environmental damage generally occur after the coin leaves the mint. And this brings us to the final lesson hidden inside the 1982 P. Washington quarter. More than 500 million were struck in Philadelphia, so the ordinary coin is common, and a scratched, toned example should not be promoted as an automatic fortune. Yet somewhere among those enormous numbers were coins that survived with extraordinary surfaces, unusually strong strikes, or genuine mint-created abnormalities. One of the finest certified 1982 P quarters reached $10,200 because the market recognized something exceptionally difficult to reproduce: elite preservation and top-level condition rarity. The coin was not valuable because it was a silver dime, it was not silver, and it was not a dime. It was a 25-cent clad Washington quarter that became extraordinary because of its condition and collector competition. That distinction is what makes the hobby so fascinating. A coin's date may be common, its mintage may be enormous, and its original face value may be tiny, yet the right combination of rarity, preservation, authentication, and demand can transform an everyday object into a significant collectible. So if a 1982 P. Washington quarter crosses your path, don't assume it is a fortune, but don't dismiss it without looking closely either. Examine the mint mark, study the surfaces, investigate unusual features, protect its originality, and remember the central truth of numismatics. Sometimes the difference between ordinary pocket change and a remarkable auction coin is hidden in details so small that you need magnification to see them.